Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu salam ala Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Anjarama to my Fulbe community. Marhaba wajam. Yes, my dear brothers and sisters, this is just a short note to give you a heads up on next week sometime. Inshallah ta'ala bi'ithnillah. And I will continue on the saga about Andalus, and I'll give you something that is rarely ever talked about from the historians, recent historians, about what happened after the rule of the Afro Arabs when they took over Andalus after our ancestral brothers had went in and took the reins of Andalus. And I'm hoping that you have enjoyed and got something out of my last program where I talked about the Fulani factor and the conquest of Andalusia and West Africa. So I will continue this saga, but I'm gonna give you something that is very interesting. There's a lot of tidbit information that you'd be interested in about what happened after our ancestral brothers were deposed from the leadership role of Andalus, which was about approximately 100 years. And then the Khalifa decided to send their people over to rule Andalus. And there's a lot of talk about this. I'll get into that, inshallah ta'ala, when I do a full program. And I also want to give you something about there's a Jewish element in this as well. And that's very interesting because you would think that you said, well, you know, how that is. If you heard my previous talk, I talked about how we entered into Andalus and that it was precipitated by the ravishing of a prominent Jewish businessman. And his daughter was ravished in Andalus. Spain, as we know it today, but Andalus, if you saw my program. And so he then sent a letter to the Amir who was sitting in Tunis. And then he, in turn, enlisted our ancestral brother here in Al-Maghrib, Tariq ibn Zayed. And that's how we end up getting there. But the Jewish element had remained in there because under the Muslims, if you look at all our history, the Jews have lived pretty well under our reign when we've had the Caliphs and so forth. They've lived under us and whatnot. But they played an important role in this saga that I'm going to give you. So we're looking at around 711 or so. They came in, our ancestral brothers, and if you saw my program, I told you what happened. And then they took over the reins. I told you what happened with the population, how they created a new race of people from the amalgamation of our brothers, our Fulani brothers, our Senike brothers, our Melnike brothers, some Hausa, and Hapular. There's a whole slew of our brothers who went in the first jihad there into Andalus. So I'll give you this tidbit that happened right after our brothers were taken out of power, because this is a very interesting situation, because you should be made aware of this because no one really talks about this too much. They talk about what's happened in the sense that this element happened by 1053 or so, but they don't give you the ins and outs of it. I'm going to give you the ins and outs of it because this is a significant part, again, of our ancestral brothers from the West African, the Sahel as we understand it today, and how they played another important role to save Andalus from the hands of the Visigoths, or we know them today as Spaniards. So I wanted to just talk about that a little bit, and also give you some another historical part of this. I'm going to talk about who these people were that went back in there, where they came from, because that's very interesting as well. And I'm going to diffuse this talk that's been happening lately, the last 10 years or so, where, as you heard me talk about, the Moors have been taken from being black now to being white, Tubab, and whatnot. But I'm going to give you some statistics. I'm going to show you something that has happened, because when our brothers went back in there, they were described again, and they weren't described as white or Tubab. See, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that and whatnot. And my dear brothers, I would say to you, if you like my talks, please subscribe, pass my videos. It doesn't take you no time to subscribe, and you pass it on to rest of our brothers and sisters, and because it costs you nothing to subscribe, and I would greatly appreciate it, because our history has been slighted, and we are very weak when it gets to history. Generally, our African brothers and our African American brothers and our Caribbean brothers in particular, these three groups are very weak when it gets down to their history. And because we have been beaten up so bad that we only take the history that our enemies have given us. And so now we have a lot of scholarship out there. Unfortunately, we have a lot of apathy among Africans, African Americans, and Caribbean Americans. We have a lot of apathy, and they don't seem to care. And a lot of it is because of the plight that they live in. We understand that. But you should care, because you should pass this history on to our children, so that it'll install some pride in them. Because in my generation, we didn't have that. We start to have things happening in my generation in the United States, but it was kind of like a false pride, because we still didn't know who we were. We had afros, and we did this, that. We had our own black language. We developed our own style of handshaking, music, and so forth and so on. But it was a false pride, because we still did not have all the information, and we didn't really care about the information. All we knew, we were black, we lived in America, so we developed a subculture inside the United States. And so therefore, that's what we went by. And again, it was a false culture, because it didn't have nothing to do in Africa per se. And we didn't have the history down. Some of us did not. So I want to impress upon you, my brothers and sisters, is to give our children this knowledge, so they'll have their pride. Because if you notice, everybody else, they have a historical background. Many of them could talk with pride that they're Irish American or Italian American or Swedish American, or Spanish American, Mexican American. The only one that seems to be lacking is the African American, the Caribbean American. We are very weak when it gets down to our history, and we don't seem to care. And when people come to us and begin to talk about us, we have nothing to say. We cannot talk much. When they begin to talk against us and say that we had nothing going in the history of mankind, we have no answer for it. But this is changing. But we should go and enlist ourselves into African programs, so we can learn our history, because it will instill some pride and give you some dignity. Like we talk about right now about the Muslims, and we talk about the Fulani people in particular and everything. I had an interesting question asked me not too long ago. One of my brothers here, he asked me a question about the Fula people, Fulani people, and I told him, I said I was Fula, so I belong to the Fulani people, and that's my heritage. And so again, brothers and sisters, this is what I'm talking about, how we should embrace our heritage and whatnot. If you're Igbo, you embrace it. If you are, or if you're Moroccan, or if you're Fulani or Hausa or Kanuri, whatever the ethnic group you are, that you learned that you are in Africa, you adopt that. So, and I urge you now to have your DNA. Those who can afford it, because it's expensive, I understand that. I think my heritage is pretty good, but you need, in order to get the real good, deep down, history, you need to go to Jet Match. If any of you are interested in knowing, please write a comment and I'll give you about jet match. The jet match will break it down all the way, I mean, for way back, okay? That's how I found out from the African heritage, but my heritage about Fulani. Yes, they gave me that. But it was Jet Match who gave me all the ins and outs that I needed. See, and they also added other history to my history and so forth. But I urge you to get those tests done. And then once you learn that you're full American, you adopt that. If you learn that you're a Tuareg American, adopt that. If you learn you're Wolof or Senike or whatever the situation may be, Bambara, Jolof, I mean, Kanuri, go all the way down the line, all these ethnic groups, whatever you have, it's in your heritage, you adopt that. And stop calling yourself, quote unquote, African Americans, because it's too vague. And if you heard me say this 1,000 times, I've always said that the African American is too vague. We have settled the American part, but most of us have never settled the African part. So you have to settle that in order for you to be whole. When you hear Japanese talk, they say Japanese American. They've settled both. Italian American, they've settled both. We're the only ones who have not, settled this dilemma within us. And so this is one of the reasons why my talks and why I show, especially those in the West, my Caribbean brothers and my African American brothers, that their brother has adopted his nationality, what he is, which is Fula. This is what I am, Fulani American. I adopt that. So I've learned about my people, and plus it also helps to have a degree in African history as well. But I didn't have pinpoint, of course, of my heritage. I didn't know many decades ago when I went to school. But now I've learned approximately about 3 years about this heritage, and I've ran with it. And this is what I urge you to do, is to follow that. And I also urge you, my brothers and sisters, to do something else also. There's a lot of talk about the historical things, especially about Islam and about the conquests and so forth that happened. There's a lot of speakers. I suggest that you find some, because each one of us will give you some well-rounded part about the history, and I urge you to do that and subscribe to those people. Because, again, if you look at us, we as Black people are just so weak when it gets to the historical things about ourselves. And this is a detriment to our well-being. Because when, you don't notice when you're in a group here and you sit and you hear all these people talk about what happened when they was in Naples in Italy, or what happened in Sicily, Italy. You hear this, they'll say about Belgrade, or they'll talk about their history here. But when the African American is about ready to talk, he cannot talk. All he can talk about is Los Angeles. All he can talk about is Texas. All he can talk about is Washington, D.C. But everyone's looking at him saying, well, okay, yes, well, I live in California. My brother over here, he lives over in Texas. But what about your history? They can't explain that. And this is a problem that we have, brothers and sisters, that we have to shore this up in order for our well-being, in order for us to take hold and take leadership in the coming years. Because without this knowledge, we cannot have the leadership that's possible to lead. We cannot, because we don't have that. And we have to come to grips that we are not African Americans. Okay, we have to come to grips with that we are full Americans, or we're Moroccan Americans, or Senegalese Americans, or whatever the situation be, Mandinka, Mende, whatever, and use that. And this is what we are. And then this will help. So my programs is designed basically to instill that pride, but also not only that, is the Islamic part of it, because we have a lot of African pundits who do talk, and we have we have some brilliant brothers and sisters, scholars in a lot of aspects, but they do not have the religious background, and they talk against the religion, especially against Islam and against Christianity. But they fail to talk about what happened about the Islamic empires, in Africa, because they were significant and they were some of the richest in the world history. So we have that history, and we should embrace that history and understand our history. And those who are living in the West, in particular, and those living in Europe as well, you cannot. I'll be very. You heard me say, I'll be very careful when I talk against Islam. I'll tell you why. Because most of you will start to find out when you do your DNA that you came from ethnic groups that were Muslim. Yes. Okay. You got to remember something. When they loaded us up on those ships, there were no Christians on those ships. They were animists. Okay. They were traditional African religions, Juju, Ifa, Orissa, Obia, and so forth, and Islam. And we had also Hebrew. We did not have Christianity. You see, that's the fallacy that many of us don't realize that. So now brothers and sisters are going to their DNA and they're finding out that their ancestors who arrived in the United States, who arrived in Jamaica or in Trinidad and Tobago or in Nassau, they were Muslims. See, so that is a history, again, that we ought to settle. This gave me pride, as you heard me talk about this a little bit in some other programs way back. But I will say this to you, and I'll get ready to close. I came here to Maghreb, Morocco in English, but I like to use Maghreb because this is the African word for this area. Maghreb, and I came here to settle, to fulfill my religious obligations, because I could not fill my religious obligations. And if you understand the Sharia Allah, you understand why I made my migration hijrah over to Maghreb. But I came to Maghreb already before in 2005. But I first came to Africa. I went to Ghana and part of Nigeria. I went to some Nigeria a little bit, and I went into Ghana, and I stayed in Ghana for a short period of time. Not long as I wanted to, but I was still working. That was in 2002. So, I had that background behind me. And then when I decided enough is enough in America, I could not practice my faith. I was tired of discrimination. I was tired of all the stuff. I said, hey, it's time for me to come back to my homeland. I did. And so when I came back here, I was proud. And when I was on the airplane, I was coming, and I felt in my heart that I would never see many of the people who I grew up with. I would not probably see my children anymore as well. But you understand the Islamic motto, you understand about that, because Subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about issues like this in the Quran. But when I came, brothers and sisters, when I got near the shores, I start to look out the window, I start seeing the shoreline, here coming into Maghreb, Morocco, and I had tears. It's like something happened to me, and I came into the African continent. It's like the tears purified me. That's right, brothers and sisters. I had this, and I saw some of the Tuba that were sitting around me. They were looking at me. They didn't understand why I had tears, but I didn't care, because I felt I was home now, and I felt that the tears were purification, and the tears are also of that from my ancestors, who we do not know what they had said when they came over to the Americas, if they gave prayers. But I felt now it's like I've satisfied their desires to return back to Africa. So I had tears, and I had a lot of tears come down. And then, matter of fact, the gentleman who was next to me in the seat, he gave me a napkin, they have on the plane, so I could wipe my face, because I had cried a lot, because one, I'm leaving America because that's what I knew, because I was born and raised in America. But, I could not live there anymore, and I didn't want to live there anymore. And I was driven to Africa. I fell in love with it. I just had this in me. I could not stand it anymore. I had to come back. 2002, I had the first glimpse of Africa. How I loved it. I saw a sea of black folk, and I could walk the streets. I was eating fufu, and I was eating dashin, and I was eating particular bananas that I like over the tuna. Some made me pay for it because I didn't realize the brother who I was with, I would tell him, hey man, these bananas here, I forgot the name of them, the short, fat ones, you don't tell them how I would, they were so sweet because I had eaten sweet bananas like this before and I ate too much and I paid for it, you know what I mean? And everything. But I was home, I could walk the streets and I mean, it was a pleasant experience for me. And then when I got to meet my teacher, who I learned quite a bit from him, and he's passed on. So I had that desire. I came back home. I changed. My diet had changed, and things began to change. And in 2005, I came to Al Maghrib to accept Islam. And then I returned back home in the United States, and then retired a year later. And then the day of my retirement, then the next morning, I was on a flight to come back here to Africa. So this is my journey, and and how I came over here and whatnot. And when I got here to Al Maghrib, things were quite different. You know what I mean? But I had been here in 2005, so I was quite acquainted to some of the things, but I could not speak Arabic, at all. I could pick up little words here and there, but I began to study and listen and whatnot, and then I began to pray, and then I start to pick up the language. But it wasn't until I went to Sudan, and that's another story. You heard me talk about 2008 and part 2009. I was in Sudan. That's when my Arabic began to pick up, and then again I learned under a good brother who's passed on as well, and he was a Sheikh Islam, brilliant old man, a distinguished scholar. And I had the chance to talk with him, even though I cannot speak with him in Arabic, but it was a brother who was there who could speak Arabic and English, so he would translate. So I learned, but I did not get it, all the Arabic language at the time. But he told me something. He said, look, I want you to get the Quran in Arabic, and I know you're going to struggle, but you finish it all the way. It took me about a year, to be honest with you, because I had to learn. Then I made my dua. Because dua, he told me, he said, you make this dua means prayer to Subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make this and say, can you give me the Arabic? I prayed. After that, my Arabic took off. And so now, like I said, I'm very comfortable speaking English and speaking Arabic as well, because this is what we speak here in Maghrib, so I speak that. And so, these are my journeys, and this is something, brothers and sisters, each one of us who have come over to Africa, we all have the same type of feeling. Something has driven us to come here to Africa. We don't know what it is, but we know Subhanahu wa ta'ala has his hand in it. But we do not know if Subhanahu wa ta'ala is answering the prayers and the cries of our ancestors who said, please bring my children. I'm getting ready to go to America as a slave, but bring my children back to Africa. I do not know if this is the case, but Subhanahu wa ta'ala he's got his hand in this, because we have too many African Americans, we have too many Caribbean Americans, we have too many African Europeans who are born in France, Britain, in Belgium, and wherever the situation may be, and they are driven back to Africa. Something is in them that told them to return back to Africa. Subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing this. But I wonder in my heart, to be honest with you, brothers and sisters, if our ancestors and their tears of anguish, and they ask Subhanahu wa ta'ala, please bring my antecedents, to come back to Africa. I feel this in my heart, because when I came here, when I got near the shores, I can look out the window. I saw I'm getting close to the shoreline, coming into Africa, and tears flowed. They just flowed. And, it was I can't explain it. And then when I came into the country, and whatnot, I had mixed emotions. I was still my eyes was very red because I had been crying a lot. And I came into the country, and now I start to take off. And then the next day, I off with the American clothes. And I began to wear the clothes that are adopted here in especially in North Africa, which we call tobes, but here we call these gandour. What I have like this is long, keeps you modest and dressed and whatnot like this. And then we have what is jalaba, which is heavy, but the hood, you see the Moroccan, it's unique for Morocco. I have plenty of those for the winter months because it gets decidedly cold here. You'd be surprised how cold it gets here. It's very interesting. You in Africa, but you have areas where snow. Even where I'm living in Fez, we've had periods, days where we have 27 degrees. I'm using the Fahrenheit, 27 degrees, 25 degrees, cold here in Fez, and then other parts of higher elevation, much colder than that. So we do have cold weather here. So I took those clothes and that was it. And as my journey went on, I had my kufi. And then when I went to Sudan to also learn about my heritage, because I have heritage in Sudan as well, I went over there. And as I got to talk to the scholar Islam and stuff, as I said, he's passed on now. And I got the opportunity to speak with him. He began to tell me, he says, look, here in Sudan, Bilad Sudan, talking about the land of the black people. You heard me talk about this many times. We're talking from southern Morocco all the way across to southern Egypt, as we understand it, okay? This is the land of black people. And he said to me, if you look at our history, he said, our people, when we became learned, we wear turbans. That's right, brothers and sisters. He said, we wear turbans. See, so this is not something I heard some African-American imams really chide black people. They should not wear this. Don't listen to them because they don't have the history correct. Because even in the 7th century, brothers and sisters, I will say this to you. When they went into Andalus, and one of the aspects of the scholar that he talked about, when he talked about he saw black people, and he described it, as you heard my show here I gave last week, I gave you the evidence to show that those people were black. And he also talked about how they were dressed and the type of sword we would call safe in Arabic, the swords they had, and then they had the short knife, which is prevalent in the areas of North Africa, especially Maghreb, as we understand it today, Senegal, Mali, and Mauritania. The little short knife, also with that. But he said something else that was very interesting. This debunks the craziness of some of our people there in the United States, who says that, you know, when you wear a turban, you're trying to act like an Arab. Brothers and sisters, don't listen to that. That's not true. Scobie described the black men being pitch black, he said, right? He talked about their horses, but there's some other aspects I did not cover. He said that they had turbans on and they had face veils that you see all the time in the desert, right? We were doing that in the 700s when we came to Andalus. We were already wearing that. So don't listen to our fanatical brothers who talk this stuff about, well, when a black man puts on a turban, he's imitating the Arabs. Don't believe that. Okay, he's not doing that because this is the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ anyway. That's the sunnah. Okay, to wear the imamah, in Arabic, the turban. Our brothers, because they came from the desert, and if anybody knows anything about the desert life and about the people, even in Fez, we have winds here, boy, many times will cut your face because the sand from the Sahara comes and it can get you good. And so you put the face veils here to protect the face. Our brothers, when they entered into war in 711, on about 711 AD, to go into Andalus, Scobie described them as having face veils and turbans. That's right. That's another tidbit of information to debunk when you hear people say, no, you should never wear this because you're imitating the Arab. Our Prophet ﷺ was Afro Arab. He was not a Tubab. He wore this. And you look at the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, he wore the imamah. And it even has a special significance. Why? Because when a black man, not black man, but when a Muslim, period, he's wearing a turban, he get ready to make ablution, you don't have to remove it. Our Prophet made the condition because he thought so much of this, okay, of the turban, that you make it when you make wudu, okay, your ablution, you get ready to make your prayer, right? You can wipe over. You don't have to remove it. That's what he thought about the turban. So again, brothers and sisters, our Fulani brothers, some of our Hausa brothers who were there in 7-Eleven, our Sinike brothers were there, our Bambara brothers were there, Malike brothers were there. We've heard there was some Mende also present there. We heard even there was some Wolof, there was some they said was joining in this jihad to go into Andalus. All of them were wearing turbans, brothers and sisters. All were wearing turbans, and they wore face masks. As you see me in some of my videos, I wear that, the face veil along with my turban. They were wearing that. This is what they entered Andalus in. So I just wanted to give you that history to debunk some of the fanaticism that's going on now. We have what we call Afrocentric Islam, and it's wrong because we don't have such a thing like this, because we have Islam and that's it. But we have brothers now in the United States who's talking crazy. They say, well, you cannot wear this. You wear this, then you Arab. Please don't listen to that. And you got to understand something, and I will close. Our Prophet ﷺ talked about this issue. He said, he described who is Arab. It's not the color of the skin, brothers and sisters. He said by language. He said, if you speak this language, then you're Arab. See, so that's what I go by. That's what I go by. But our nationality is what we are. He says you should be happy who you are. But the destination of being Arab because you speak the Arabic language, because when you read the Quran, especially in Arabic, what are you doing? You're reading it in Arabic, right? You're reciting it in Arabic. See, so you got to remember that, brothers and sisters. So I will get ready to close with this to tell you this. Next week, sometime, I'll talk about this very important issue in Andalus, brothers and sisters, because this is a significant thing. The trials and tribulations that happened when we got there, that was one thing. We have conquered the country in 7-Eleven. You remember that? We've conquered it. You remember what I talked about before here. Let me see. When we got, I don't see it here, brothers and sisters. So I don't know where we got it here. Okay, well, you see this map here, but this is the modern day map, of course. But you see Morocco at the top there, and then you see that little green blue up there above that. That's Spain as we understand it. And so I want to mention this fact that we had a second situation that went into there, and I'll get more into that. I wanted to cover that because it's so significant, because the trials and tribulations that happened, and then when the Afro Arabs came into Andalus, then they began to take the reins, and they became the aristocrats of Andalus. Something happened in that period of time, and the Jewish element was also involved in this. But our brothers came back to save the day. And I'll get into that to explain that to you, because it's a very interesting saga that happened prior to that. And I'll talk about that issue in next week, inshallah. And also, brothers and sisters, please look at my previous tape to get caught up to speed on Andalus and what happened. And so spread my tape, brothers and sisters, those who's interested in history, want to know about their ancestral brothers, because most of us come not from Kenya. No, most of us don't come from South Africa. We come from the Sahel, and we come from the coastal West Africa, right? You think about that. So you should be up to speed on the history on your ancestral brothers and sisters who came from this region, because most of us, 99.9% who are in the West, are from West Africa. Okay, and their percentage of North Africa, and then some are black brothers from East Africa, and so forth and so on. But most of us that are there in America hail from the Sahel and from West Africa. We have a rich history, brothers and sisters. Okay, a rich history, and we had empires that were something else. Even the Afro Arabs who came over began to write about that. The Europeans, before they became racist, talked about what was happening in the Sahel and West Africa in particular. You should be very proud of that. So I want to continue that saga to give you this uplifting, so that way you will have fuel. So when you're sitting at a table You have somebody who's Irish. You have someone who's Japanese. You have someone who's Chinese. You have another person who may be another other type of nationality. He may be Mexican, and they just start talking about historical things. You'll be able to talk about your family tree, or you talk about what happened in your neck of the woods here in the Sahel or West Africa, because you should be able to do that. Because I've seen that. I had that happen. I saw this. I'll never forget that. I will close, brothers and sisters. There was a situation happened with a good friend of mine. He was at work, and they decided to go out. And there was not too many blacks in the company he was working at. He came and explained this to me, and I saw his face when he came to explain this to me. It was full of anguish. And then he began he said, I'm going to change this. They were sitting at the table, and there were 6 different nationalities at this table. They were eating pizza, whatever it was. It was many years ago now. And he was talking about how everybody was talking about how they're Irish, their Italian history, their heritage, the Japanese, they can explain this and that in their history. And then when they went to my dear brother, he could not explain nothing. He said, I'm from Los Angeles, da da da. Everybody looked at him and said, yeah, we're all here in Los Angeles. Okay, yeah, well, but what about your history? He couldn't explain it. He said that was an embarrassment, and he changed that. See, so that's why, brothers and sisters, you never know when you be called on to talk about your ancestral history and about your ancestral brothers and sisters. It may come a day, and you don't want the embarrassment, because you should be proud. It's not right for us not to be proud when everyone else there sitting in the United States can beat on their chest, I'm Mexican American, or they say I'm Japanese American, Chinese American. You should be able to say, hey, I'm full American. Okay, I'm Hausa American, or I'm Seneca American, I'm Moroccan American, whatever. I'm Arab American. You should be able to say that without any reservations. So that's why I talk about these issues, brothers and sisters. And so I'll leave you with that. So look for this up-and-coming talk here next week sometime, inshallah, ta'ala bi'ifnillah, about the continuing saga in this intricate situation that happened in Andalus between the years approximately of 711 to the 1000s. Okay, there's something that happened. I'll get into that, and I hope that you stay tuned, inshallah. And again, brothers and sisters, if you like this, please tell brothers and sisters to subscribe to my channel, spread this tape and my tapes, and look at my tapes, and we can all learn from one another. As I've been learning, brothers have been writing me now. I'm starting to get a lot of letters from people. That's great. And I'm starting to learn, and they're starting to learn also. And that's what we should be doing as Black folk. Learn from one another. So I'll leave you with that. Assalamu alaikum. Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.